I've had the Sony A7IV for a few months now, and I've been able to take it with me on weddings, portrait sessions, studio sessions, and also record some videos with it. And on today's video, I'm just going to talk about, is that Sony A7IV a camera that I'm going to keep and continue to grow with through 2025 and beyond? Should it be a camera that you buy in 2025, even though it came out in 2021? I'm talking about my likes, my dislikes, and is it worth switching to Sony if you're a guy like me switching from Canon? We're gonna talk about all the things today, so let's jump right into the video. So first thing we're gonna talk about when you talk about the Sony A7IV and a new camera, and anytime I'm buying something that I'm gonna have my hands on a lot, is ergonomics and build quality of the camera. So the build quality feels very premium and very high duty. I really like that. It almost feels like a carbon fiber material, but it's more like metallic feeling than a Canon camera, which is more plasticky. But one thing about the build quality and the ergonomics of this camera is that the grip is very boxy. Now the Canon camera was more rounded, so it felt a lot better in my hand initially. But when going to Sony, I was like, I really don't know if I like the grip and the build of this camera just because it feels so boxy. But after using it for a few months and never getting used to it, it really doesn't make a whole lot of difference. It's just gonna be personal preference for you. Now, when we talk ergonomics, another thing that I really like about this camera is a scroll wheel. I'm always gonna look for a scroll wheel on any camera I use, and the scroll wheel is going to be the thing I use. I probably use a scroll wheel more than anybody else on planet Earth. I don't know, but the scroll wheel is always a thing that I'm gonna look for. And one of the things that I love about this scroll wheel is that it also doubles as a D-pad. So that's one thing that the Canon scroll wheel was missing. It had a scroll wheel, it was a very good functioning scroll wheel, but it did not act as a D-pad, which was kind of frustrating. So on a Sony, you're able to use a scroll wheel and then use a D-pad to get to wherever you want in the menu system and beyond. So I really like that about this camera. One thing I do dislike about the ergonomics of this camera is the shutter dial. The shutter dial to me is in a very awkward spot, and you know, it takes some getting used to, of course, like with anything, but I just haven't really gotten used to it. It's just in a very awkward spot. I don't love it. I like the shutter dial placement of the Canon cameras more than I do Sony. So instead of using the stock shutter dial, I actually switched my settings. So now I actually use the aperture dial and change that to be my shutter dial, and I changed my exposure compensation dial to be my aperture dial, just because it works a little bit better for me. Now, that's just me personally. Other people aren't going to be that way. Other people are going to like the way the shutter dial is. I personally don't. So that's just me. That's just a personal qualm. Take that with a grain of salt, if you will. But anyway, so the next thing I do like about this camera is that it is 33 megapixels in a full frame CMOS sensor. Now, I know a lot of people are going to say megapixels don't matter, which is true to a certain extent. Depends on what you're doing. So I came from a Canon R6 Mark II, which is 24 megapixels, more than enough megapixels to get amazing images. I do like 33 because of the fact that it can retain a lot of resolution, and when it comes to cropping, I'll be able to crop a little bit more and still maintain a lot of those megapixels and a lot of the resolution in my images. To put into perspective, here's some images on the screen. I went out and shot some sports. I'm not a sports photographer at all, but I went and shot some sports, and these pictures had to be cropped from like 33 megapixels down to 5. So the fact that I have 33 megapixels, I am able to crop a whole lot more and still maintain that resolution and still get a good quality and usable image out of this camera. So I really like that it's 33 megapixels. Now, when you get into the 40, 50, 60, I personally think that's asinine. I personally don't think anybody needs that many megapixels unless you're like wildlife, you're cropping a whole lot every single time you shoot. Then that's a different story. But if for me, portrait, wedding photography, and videography, 33 is like sweet spot for me. I love that. When it comes to the photo specs, this does shoot only 10 frames per second, but a lot of people are going to say only 10 frames per second. And for me personally, as a portrait and wedding photographer, I never use 10 frames per second. I never go higher than drive mode low when I shoot pictures because I don't need it. If I'm shooting portraits, I don't need to be on high burst. And if I'm shooting weddings, I'm not about to be on high burst. Even when I'm shooting the first kiss, I'm not on high burst. I just time it. I just time it when they go in for the kiss, bang off a few shots, and I've never missed a first kiss. Never have. So if you time it right, you don't need the full 10 frames per second. Now, if you're shooting sports, you can make the argument that you need more than 10 frames per second. I personally, well, I don't shoot sports, so I don't know. But yeah, I don't use the full 10 frames per second. So 10 frames per second is more than enough for me. For the video specs, what I really like about this camera, obviously it records 4K 24, obviously records 4K 30, and records 4K 60. I'm gonna put an asterisk next to that because I'm gonna come back to that later when I talk about my dislikes. But the resolution on this video is great in my opinion because it is a 7K downsample into a 4K image. So all the resolution, all the detail, all the clarity and quality and stuff like that is really good on this camera if you ask me. This reminds me of my days when I was shooting on my Canon R7, which was a crop sensor camera, but did have that 7K downsample into 4K, did have 33 megapixels. So it shared a lot of the same specs as the Sony A7IV, except that was crop sensor, this is full frame. Now, another thing that I do like about this camera is that it's able to record an S-Log2, which is a profile which gives you a lot more dynamic range from shadows to highlights. S-Log3, which is kind of the standard, and also S-Cinetone, which is what I'm recording right now. Cinetone gives you that S-Log look, except it's like a pre-graded image, so you can still throw LUTs over top of it, you can still color grade it, but it takes a lot less work to color grade. So I really like that aspect. So if you're a person who wants the log look, but don't really have a lot of knowledge in color grading, then S-Cinetone is going to be a perfect profile for you. Staying with the video, this camera also gives you the ability to do what is called a smooth skin effect. Now, smooth skin effect is what it sounds like. It gives you the ability to smooth out the skin of your subject. Now, use this at your own risk. I'm using it right now, I'm on low, but if you use it on high, it's going to smooth it out so much where it's going to be the point where it looks like AI, it looks fake, you look like clay, and it's just pretty much, I wouldn't say it's unusable, but it just looks weird. Now, I would use the smooth skin effect on my weddings, so to give that like full glam, you know, luxury beauty look, but I would never use it on high. Maybe use it on medium. Low, I feel like is enough for me because I'm not trying to like beautify myself. I'm ugly enough as it is. Maybe I should use a smooth skin then. I'll probably make myself look better. Well, anyway, yeah, I'll probably use it on medium for my weddings, but I would never use it on high just because I don't want my subjects looking like clay. But this is a feature that the camera has that is really cool for you to incorporate. So Cinetone, log, and also a bunch of other profiles that they have in the menu system as well. So yeah, I do like that as far as the video aspect goes. Another thing I like about this camera is that it has full-size HDMI. I feel like no cameras on the Canon lineup except for their cinema line, and now I think the R5 Mark II has full-size HDMI. It's always been micro, and you always need an adapter and all this stuff. It was just annoying. So the fact that this has full-size HDMI that I can use with my monitor is great. I have no complaints about that, and I really enjoy that. So now those are some of the things I like about this camera. Now we're gonna talk about some of the things that I dislike about this camera. And the first thing is the menu screen, or the menu navigation, the menu whatever. Oh my gosh. Pulling out the box and trying to get through the menu, it was so overwhelming. I was like, where is this? What is this? What the heck is this? Now, apparently on the older Sonys, it was even worse, but the Sony A7IV, it was still pretty confusing. But like with anything you use for the first time, it's gonna be a little bit tricky. Thankfully, with most cameras, you're able to customize a menu setting, and you're able to take everything you use on an everyday basis and put it into this one menu system or one menu block. So you just have to go there, fix what you need to, call it a day. So without that, it would be a cluster trying to navigate this Sony menu because it's just so confusing. I feel like it was more user-friendly on the Canon menu system or the Canon cameras. I feel like they were more user-friendly when it came to the menus than the Sonys, but it's not the end of the world. Once you use it enough times, it's like, okay, I finally get it. But out the box, I was like, yo, what the heck is this menu? So that's a dislike, but it's kind of just one of those things where you just kind of got to use it and get used to it. And then once you get used to it, yeah, it's fine. Another thing I don't like about this camera is, you know, even though this records 4K 60, which is nice for my weddings when I want to, you know, do slow motion shots, stuff like that. But the 4K 60 has a crop. Now, it's not the end of the world that it has a crop. You're able to work around it. And a plus about having a crop is, and having a 33 megapixel sensor is that even though you record with a crop, you're still getting a 15 pixel image in your videos at 4K 60. But I just feel like nowadays, again, granted, this camera came out in like 2021, but I just feel like, you know, like why put a crop anyway? Like why have a full frame camera and then, you know, forced to put a crop? Like why not have a full frame and then if you want to crop, you can crop. Now that's just a little qualm for me. Obviously I can work around that. I can just throw on an APS-C lens and, you know, navigate that. Like Shure has a bunch of APS-C lenses that I can use. There are a bunch of 1.2s. They're the sniper series. Now I can use that and call it a day and still get, you know, great quality videos. But at the same time, I'm like, dang, like this really has a crop. That kind of sucks. My Canon R6 Mark II did not have a crop. So it's just, I mean, first world problems. It doesn't really matter a whole lot, but it is one of the qualms that I do have with this camera. Another thing that I don't like about this camera is that out the box, it will overheat. There's not a chance it'll overheat, it will overheat. So when I first got this camera out the box, I set it up to record and I was like, oh, I'm about to record this YouTube video on my new Sony, it's about to be fire. I got 9 minutes in and overheated and died. I was like, what is going on? Like this is unusable, I'm about to return this. Until I found out that you have to change a setting. You got to go to your power setting options and you have to change the auto temp power off from standard to high. I'm not sure why that's a thing at all, but it is what it is. So once he changed that, I was able to get 30, 40, 50 minutes of recording without even getting an overheating warning. And at that point, it was either your battery dies or your SD card fills. And that's when it's gonna, you know, stop recording or overheat. So you won't have any overheating problems at that. Now that is at room temperature. If you're outside recording in 90-degree heat, 100-degree heat, that's a totally different story. Use common sense when you're doing that. But as far as room temperature goes, or like lower, like 60, 50 degrees, I don't think you're gonna have any issues with overheating once you change the setting. The fact that you gotta change the setting was kind of frustrating in itself, but it's not the end of the world. Change the setting, go on about your business, and you don't have to worry about overheating. Now, with all this being said, talking about the likes of the camera, talking about the dislikes of the camera. Do I recommend this camera for people who are getting into mirrorless systems, people who want to upgrade, people who want to switch from a different brand to Sony? Do I recommend this camera in 2025? Do I regret switching from Canon to Sony? Do I wish I would have stayed with Canon? Like, what are we talking about here? What do I feel? What are my thoughts? Whatever. Okay, so my thoughts. The Sony A7IV, if you buy this camera in 2025, you will have this camera for a long time because you'll love it. I have no regrets switching from Canon to Sony, and I've really been enjoying this camera. Now, is Sony better than Canon? Is Canon better than Sony? Those are always going to be questions that people ask themselves, that people are going to want to talk about, like what brand is better. In 2025, there is no brand that's better than the other. It's just what works for you. Like you might have a brand that works better for you, and somebody else might have a brand that works better for them. I don't think there's a brand that's necessarily better than any other brand. It's just what works for you, okay? So Sony A7IV, I definitely recommend it in 2025. There are rumors that a Sony A7V is coming out, I think, Q1, Q2 of this year, or at least gonna be announced. But I mean, if you wanna wait for the Sony A7V, then go right ahead. But if you do buy the Sony A7IV, you're not gonna be missing out on too much. Like you might get uncropped 4K 60 on the Sony A7V, hopefully, but other than that, you're probably gonna get all the same things. So yeah, I mean, I definitely recommend the Sony A7IV. Who do I think this is for? I think the Sony A7IV is definitely for photographers. I would say it's for videographers, as long as they're like commercial videographers, like talking head interviews and stuff like that, where you solely need to record at 24 frames per second. I probably wouldn't recommend this for like a wedding videography camera, just because of that crop at 4K 60, and you're going from a 7K downsample at 33 megapixels to a 7K downsample at 15 megapixels. And at that point, if you ask me, you might as well buy a Sony A7S III and then call it a day for that. But that's just my personal opinion. So yeah, I recommend this Sony A7IV for anybody wondering, especially if you're a photographer. if you're a content creator, if you're looking to just get into the Sony ecosystem, I definitely recommend this camera. Now, this video is not sponsored by Sony at all. It's not sponsored by anybody, but if you are curious about getting a film look on your videos, check out Dehancer. Dehancer is a film emulation software that's compatible with Capture One, Final Cut Pro, Adobe Premiere, After Effects, Lightroom, and a lot of other platforms. And you're able to take your modern day video footage and turn it into vintage style film like footage. And Dehancer is just a film emulation software, works with all the major camera brands. And I have a code down in the video description to get you 10% off your purchase. And I also have a video talking about Dehancer that you can click right up here to learn more about the software. So with that being said, that is it for today's video. Like and subscribe to the video, or like and subscribe to the channel if this is of some value to you. And there'll be a lot more videos where this came from. If you're going to be at Imagen USA this weekend in Dallas, Texas, let me know down in the comments below, because I look forward to connecting with each and every one of y'all. So with that being said, that is it. I'm gonna holler at y'all next time. Peace.